Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Make him the cutest that I've ever seen.
As the dust settled with every step, he watched it rise again with the next step that he knew was coming right away. He could taste it against his dry tongue. Close down to the cobblestone road, weighed down by the 80 to 100 pounds of lumber that he carried on his shoulders, on his back. He was surprised, though. They'd gone through the streets, the main roads of the town. The guy in front of him seeming to get weaker with every step, sometimes propped up by soldiers, but as they came to an incline, he saw the pace quicken. He saw the man walk with a little more determination, and it surprised him. And as he started to walk up, his own pace probably slowed down up that hill. He knew it was the last few yards, but it still slowed down. And he knew that it wasn't supposed to go this way. This was a place he'd visited year over year over year, from childhood up into adulthood, up into the point where he knew he would take his family, his sons, he had 2 of them. He would bring them to this town every year in early spring to celebrate this Passover, to celebrate a meal, to observe that time when way back in Exodus, God had spared the firstborn of Israel. And every year he would come. This year he'd just come in, and it was different. This year he came in, and instead of the typical families gathering in homes, instead of the typical upper rooms where they would have meals together and observe and talk about those days of Moses, this year he came into a crowd. This year he came into an execution. And his thought was, I should take a look. I should take a quick peek. As I'm passing by right here, I should go look and see what's happening. And that's where we come into the text today. If you're completely new to this series, we're in the One-Hit Wonders series. Today's story, Mark 15, verse 16. Go ahead, find a Bible near you, turn to it. This would be a great series for you guys to bring Bibles from home. It is a different thing. When you settle in with the Bible you know well, with the Bible you can write in, scribble in, fold the pages, rip pages out if you don't like them, whatever you have to do with that Bible, it's a different thing than if you grab a Bible off a pew. If you don't have your Bible today, that's fine. Just grab the one in the pew and consider it a gift. Sorry, Gene. Grab that Bible, and as you turn there, let me just frame the series, One-Hit Wonders. It's about those unexpected ways that God uses us when we make ourselves available. Karen launched it last week. Who can remember the characters from last week? We'll do this by a raise of hands. Yes, Kathy. The Midwives, that's their title, and can anybody remember a name? These are not easy, these are tough. If anybody can pin a name down, that's impressive. Dan. Pua is one of them. That's the one that Karen said you don't name a cat that. But then there's a second one, and you can name a cat that. What's that one? Shifra. Yeah, that one's a lot prettier, right? And it's the midwives. They show up once in Exodus chapter 1 towards the end, and then poof, they're gone. But the impact that they made in the story is dramatic. It's drastic. God used them in an unexpected way once in the story, and it changed the rest of the narrative. Today, we're jumping into Mark. And if you found chapter 15, verse 16, here we go. That's 21. I'm reading before that. The soldiers led him into the courtyard of the palace, that is the governor's headquarters. And they called together the whole cohort. Somewhere around 300 to 1,300 soldiers total is what that number would be. And they clothed him in a purple cloak, and after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on him, and they began saluting him. Hail, King of the Jews! They struck his head with a reed, spat on him, and knelt down in homage to him. After mocking him, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him, and they led him out to crucify him. And this is where our one-hit wonder steps in. They compelled a passerby Circle, highlight, and under passerby. Unless you have a Pew Bible, don't do that. But if you've got your own, circle, highlight, underline, passerby, who was coming in from the country to carry his cross. It was Simon the Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus. Then they brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. They offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he didn't take it, and they crucified him and divided his clothes among them, casting lots to decide who would get them. And so he's just passing by Simon the Cyrene. It would have been, like we said, a usual trip for him. Cyrene is in modern-day Libya, and it had a heavy concentration of Jewish people, most of them very devout. Simon is a Jewish name. He would have come in probably with his family to observe the Passover, and then out of nowhere, passing by, a soldier makes eye contact with him. And in those days, a soldier could compel you, could force you to carry anything that they wanted for about 1 mile. The road from the palace to Golgotha, straight shot, would be about a 650-yard walk. Something like, if you can do math, some number of football fields, at least 6 of them. That's the path. However, they would parade you through town because crucifixion, in all its brutality, in all of its horror, was intended to be an example. If you break these laws, then you will see this. It was intended to prevent and divert. It was a brutal way to kill somebody. So he's walking through, and a soldier makes eye contact with him. And what's happening here, normally the prisoner, normally the convicted, the guilted party, would carry their own cross the entire way. This one was different. If you remember, the soldiers mocked and beat Jesus so badly that he couldn't carry his own cross, and they didn't want him to die on the way. There's no compassion built into this. They wanted the guy to die hanging on a cross. It wasn't like they were being nice to him. It wasn't like there was a shred of pity in the soldiers. They mocked him and shamed him brutally. They simply wanted him to make it to the place where they can pin him to a piece of wood and watch him die. So they picked Simon off. And as you dig through the story, you begin to wonder, where's the impact? How was Simon chosen? Where's the one-hit wonder nature of this story here? And so a couple points as we dive into the story of Simon, which you notice is only one verse out of the one we read. Verse 21, it's an in and out, it's a drive-by story. Simon gets one single verse, but he changes the story dramatically. And there's a couple points about Simon that I think give us something in our Medfield 2019 context that tell us about this availability. What does it mean to be available so that God can do unexpected things through you? And so I've got like 4 points. I'm only going to give you 2 because we're going to get to communion. So point number 1, availability in the eyes of God is often linked to your level of reliability and responsibility. He had grown up knowing this is what you do. If you are a devout Jew, if you follow God, if you follow those commandments, if you follow those instructions and traditions, you show up in Jerusalem in those 8 days, early spring, and you observe the Passover. And that's what he's there to do. It is so often in the text that when God calls somebody out, check this out. Peter, where was he when Jesus came and said, "Follow me"? Can anybody name that? What was he doing? He was fishing, right? Think about the other 2 initial disciples that he called. What were they doing when God called them? They were fishing too. Think about Moses. Where was Moses when God called him? He was shepherding, right? What do all of those things have in common? Where were these people when God called them? They were at work. They were going through a daily routine that maybe wasn't awesome. It certainly wasn't a glorious lifestyle, but that's where they were. That's what they were faithful to. That's when God showed up and called them. And so often as we go through life, we're always looking for a connection with God in these ways that most of us just don't get. Like, I'm probably not going to get a burning bush that talks to me. It's probably not going to happen. I'm not going to split the Mediterranean Sea or any little tiny river and have the whole youth group walk through. That's not going to happen for me, right? If I'm ever drowning in a pool, I'm probably not going to stand up on the water and start walking to the edge, right? Like, we don't get those. Most of us don't get that. Most of us get up, take care of your kids, take care of your spouse, clean your home, manage your resources well, go to work, come back, do it again. That's what it looks like. God shows up in lives where people are reliable and responsible. I've worked with several teams in my measly 37 years, and some have been awesome, some have been terrible. Right now, I work with a team that is second to none. I can call anybody on this team and say, hey, I'm running late on snacks for tonight, and I'll get like 4 texts immediately that say, I've got it. I will show up 30 minutes early, and I will set up snacks. I can call them up and say, hey, this student is going through this. They will call back within 5 minutes, and they will say, I've got this with you. I work with 9 senior high fellowship adult leaders that are there weekly on Sundays without fail. And it makes a difference for the students. That's not the only team, though. On Monday nights, if you show up on most Monday nights throughout the year, you will see that 30 minutes before the middle school program starts, there are approximately 22 high schoolers that have shown up to talk about their small groups, their middle schoolers, the middle schoolers that they lead, the middle schoolers that they talk to. They will show up 30 minutes in advance, whether or not they have finals that week, work, a concert, a game, classes, tests, essays. And that's independent of the friend and family pressures. They show up weekly. Where do you think they got that? They got that from 9 adults that show up on Sundays. You see how that works? It's those things, those moments, those unexpected ways that God will use you to drastically change the narrative of his life, his kingdom, and the life of the church when you're just reliable and responsible. And then there's the second thing. Your availability in God's eyes is and never will be based on your resume or your reputation. If you've read through this Mark story, by the way, if you ever want to, it's like an hour and a half sit down read cover to cover of that book. You should do it. It's intended to be read as a single story. But if you look just one chapter before, you'll notice that there's a guy missing from this story, a guy that's been there from the beginning, a guy that has been there since Jesus said, drop your nets and follow me, a guy that has been there through every mass feeding, 5,000, 4,000, a guy that has been there through every healing. He's a fixture at the miracles. He's one of the 3 that Jesus would say, you, and you, come with me. You'll recognize him as Peter. You'll see that there's a guy that has been there every single day throughout this whole thing, and now he is oddly absent. But you'll also remember that just one chapter before, in verse 66 of chapter 14, there's a story. There's a story that starts with Jesus saying, tomorrow, this is going to happen to me. They're going to take me, and you're all going to desert me. And guess who speaks up? If your money's on Peter, you're totally right. Peter speaks up, and he goes, nope, not me. Maybe these other 11, especially that Judas guy that stands towards the back all the time, for sure they're going to ditch you, but not me. He closes that out by saying, I will go with you till the death. And then we see a few chapters later that once they do take him and they lead him to a palace and they start interrogating him, Peter starts keeping more of a distance. It literally says Peter followed from a distance. He made it as far as the courtyard, a campfire, and he was asked 3 times, aren't you? You're one of those guys. I've seen you there. You've been at every miracle. You've been at every church service. You nail those Bible studies. You know all the old hymns and the new hymns. You've been there. Your reputation as a faithful Christian, that precedes you. I know that you are connected to him. I know that you follow him. And Peter's response 3 times, me. I have nothing to do with that guy. I am not associated with him. I don't follow him. I never met him before. Maybe some of us have been there, where we rely on, we bank on that history, that family that we came from, that identity that we've built up, the success that we've created for ourselves. And what the Bible reminds us of over and over and over is that when it really comes down to it, it is not the reputation and the resume that you have that God looks for. It's your eternal perspective in the moment. It's not like the midwives didn't risk anything. It's that they feared God more than Pharaoh. In this case, we have a Peter that fears man more than God. It is not your resume or your reputation that will poise you, that will position you to be used by God in unexpected ways. In that story where we saw Peter last, where he denies that he even knows Jesus, what is he pretending to be? Think about that. He says, I just kind of showed up here. I'm just standing by this fire. I'm just cold, and this fire is warm. What is he pretending to be? What's that? One of the crowd. He's pretending to just be a bystander. Peter wants to make himself look like a passerby. Whoever circled, highlighted, and underlined passerby, we're going back to that. They compelled a passerby who was coming from the country to carry the cross. If you did that, make a line over to carry the cross. We have now a story where a complete stranger to Jesus, a guy that had come in just to observe Passover like he had done for years, a guy that knew nothing of these miracles, these healings, these feedings, a guy that hadn't sat through a sermon on the Mount or a sermon on the plain, a guy that just showed up at the right place, right time, ready to do what God wanted, a guy that had just shown up, went from being a passerby, a nobody in the story, a one-hit wonder, to being the guy that is actually carrying the cross with Jesus. And this other guy, who was a fixture of the Jesus stories, went from being the most committed disciple to being a passerby. Do you see that? Do you get that? Do you see what that looks like in our lives? How we can go immediately from being a committed follower, ready to go with God to the death, whatever it takes, whatever it looks like to impact this world, this community, to grow this church, to make a difference in people's lives, to truly worship God. We go from that mentality to saying, well, maybe that's not for me. I can go this far. I'll follow at a distance. I'll stay at the campfire. I'll stay at the gate. But as soon as it actually looks like putting lumber on my back and following God into those uncomfortable moments of ministry, we become a bystander. This one-hit wonder, the Cyrene, Simon, who just came into town to have a meal, somehow ended up being Jesus to Jesus. He ended up carrying the load of Christ himself. It's based often on how reliable and responsible we are in just our daily lives, and it is never based on our resume or our reputation. Let's pray. God, thank you for a story that is so real in the lives of a community in 2019 Medfield, and yet was written 2,000 years ago. Thank you for sending yourself in the form of a baby to live with us, to grow with us and then to die for us. Thank you for letting us come and simply remember for a moment who you are, that we get to sit in a room together and interact with the God of everything that has ever been created, with a God that knows the most intimate pieces of our lives. Thank you that we can come to you this morning. Thank you that we can worship you, sing to you, pray to you, and that you invite us to your table. Amen. In preparation for